Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello learners. Welcome to our course of Microeconomics and its applications. Today we are going to have the third lecture of Unit 2. And I am the course coordinator as well as the presenter of this lecture, and my name is Dr. Aparna Samudra. And I hope that all of you must be enjoying this course of microeconomics. Let us have a look as to today what this lecture is going to be about. The first thing that we will be discussing in today's lecture is the concept of indifference curve. Second thing we will be talking about is what do we mean by marginal rate of substitution. Thereafter, we will also know that what are the various properties of indifference curve. Now, before going ahead with today's lecture, learners, let us just quickly recap as to what all we have done in this second unit of this course. We had started with the concept of consumer behavior, wherein we are trying to determine that how much should a consumer buy or consume so that his or her satisfaction is maximized. And in order to determine this consumer's equilibrium, or in order to study this consumer behavior, we have seen that there are two approaches. One is called as the cardinal approach and other is called as the ordinal approach. In the previous two lectures, we have understood about the cardinal approach, wherein Marshall had talked about the diminishing marginal utility. We have understood the law of diminishing marginal utility. Also, we have understood law of equimarginal utility. And then we have determined that how a consumer should purchase and how much he or she should purchase so that his utility is maximized. We had also said in the first lecture of this particular unit that the other approach of understanding the consumer behavior is the ordinal approach. What was the difference between cardinal and ordinal approach, learners? Cardinal approach had said that a consumer is able to measure the utility he or she can derive by consumption of any good or any service. Whereas the ordinal approach, as the name suggests, talks about that it is not easy for any consumer to measure the utility he or she is getting, but he will be able to order his preferences. That is, he will be able to say that I prefer bundle A over bundle B, or I am indifferent between bundle A or bundle B. So you are able to order your preferences. So today we are going to discuss this particular ordinal approach, and therein the concept of indifference curves comes into picture. Let us understand now what do we mean by indifference curves. What is an indifference curve? What do we mean by the English meaning of word indifference? For example, I say I am indifferent between two situations, means I am okay with both of them. I am not preferring one situation over another situation. So this particular indifference curve talks about a similar situation which comes before a consumer. According to Leftovich, a single indifference curve or an indifference curve shows the different combinations of two goods. Let us say if a consumer is buying two goods X and Y. So what does Leftovich says? That different combinations of X and Y may be available to the consumer. So all those combinations, different combinations, that is different number of units of X and Y are in each combination. So when we talk about an indifference curve, we are saying it shows the different combinations of X and Y that give or yield equal satisfaction to the consumer. That is, if a consumer says that if there are 4 bundles of X and Y which are available to me, or 4 combinations, different combinations of X and Y available to me, But between all these combinations, I am indifferent. Why am I indifferent? Because all of them are giving me equal level of satisfaction. So a curve which graphically shows different combinations of x and y giving equal level of satisfaction to the consumer is depicted in what we called as an indifference curve. Another definition has been given by Ferguson. What does he say? He says an indifference curve is a combination of goods, that is, various combinations of goods, which give the same level of total utility to the consumer. Therefore, the consumer is indifferent between them. So, indifference curve graphically will represent various combinations of two goods, and each combination is yielding, giving the same level of total utility to the consumer. Because each combination is giving the same utility to the consumer is remaining indifferent between these goods or these combinations. Now, as we had derived the demand schedule, similarly, indifference curve schedule is used to derive an indifference curve. Now, let us see this example wherein we are taking that, let us say, assuming the consumer is buying apples and oranges both. Okay. Now, if you see this table, there are four combinations which are available to the consumer, which are depicted by A, B, C, D. The first combination A is saying that the consumer says, give me 1 apple and give me 10 oranges. Other combination is saying 2 apples and 7 oranges, and so on. If all these four combination A, B, C, D, which are giving you different combinations of apples and oranges, these yield, that is A, B, C, D, even though all four of them have different quantities of apples and different quantities of oranges, but they are giving same satisfaction. They are yielding equal satisfaction to the consumer. This particular table will be called as a indifference schedule. Okay. Now, when we plot this indifference curve, this particular indifference curve schedule on a graph, where let us say we are measuring oranges on the y-axis and apples on the x-axis. Now, all these four A, B, C, D, they are showing us different combinations of apples and oranges. Okay, so we are plotting them on this particular graph, and when we join these 4 points, which 4 points? Those combinations of apples and oranges which are giving the same level of satisfaction, or in other words, the consumer is indifferent or neutral whether he consumes A bundle, B combination, C combination or D combination. His total utility derived remains the same. Therefore, when you join all these 4 points, the curve that you get is known as indifference curve. So, indifference curve is basically a diagrammatical or a graphical representation of an indifference schedule. How do we derive an indifference schedule? Indifference schedule means different combination of two goods are given by the consumer, and he says that I am getting the same level of satisfaction from all these combinations. So, from the indifference schedule, when we plot it on a graph, a diagrammatic representation will be called as an indifference curve. So, if we want to define indifference curve, we will say it is a curve that shows all possible combination of two goods between which a person is indifferent. That is, the person or the consumer in this particular example is indifferent between A, B, C, D, because all these combinations of apples and oranges are yielding or giving him the same total utility. Okay, now again I am telling you, indifference curve is what? It is a curve which is showing you different combinations of two goods but giving same level of satisfaction. right? Now, when you plot many indifference curves on a graph, that is called as an indifference map. So what is an indifference map? Indifference map represents group of various indifference curves, and each curve is expressing a given level of satisfaction. So this means all the points which are lying, points means all the various combinations of good x and good y which are lying on IC1, that is the first indifference curve, let us say, will give him the same level of satisfaction. Whereas the points which are lying on IC2, which is a higher indifference curve compared to IC1, will give him a similar level of satisfaction, and similarly IC3. So a group of all the indifference curves which are expressing a given level of satisfaction, when they are put together on the same graph, we call them as an indifference map. Now, a thing which all of you should keep in mind is that as you are shifting, as the indifference curves are shifting outwards or rightwards, that is when you are moving from indifference curve IC1 to IC2, means you are shifting outside, you are shifting rightward. This is the right direction from IC1 to IC2 to IC3. If there is another indifference curve, let us say IC4, which is above IC3, as you move to the right, the level of satisfaction goes on increasing. So a higher indifference curve means a higher level of satisfaction. Therefore, from the point of view of satisfaction, your IC3 will give a greater satisfaction than IC2, and IC2 will give a greater level of satisfaction than IC1. So an indifference curve map is basically giving you a group of all those indifference curves which are showing different level of satisfactions. Now moving further, what are the various assumptions of indifference curve? When we analyze this indifference curve, certain assumptions have to be made. Let us discuss those assumptions. The first is the rationality of the consumer. Rationality means that every consumer aims at maximizing his total utility. His aim is to get maximum utility. Second, we are talking about ordinal utility. That is, utility can be expressed ordinally. That is, consumer is able to tell only order of his preferences. That is, for example, if he is saying that A, B, C, D give him the same level of satisfaction, he has ordered his preferences. But if he says that E gives him more satisfaction than A, he is ordering his preferences. He is not measuring how much utility he is getting. He is just giving you the order of his preferences. Therefore, it is called as ordinal utility, or utility is expressed ordinally, giving orders. Order means your preferences. One is the same, A is the same as B, or D is more than A. So he is just giving his preferences, he is ordering his preferences. Then another assumption is of non-satiety, that is, consumer is not oversupplied with goods in question. Then another assumption, very important assumption, is transitivity of choices, which means that if consumer prefers A to B and B to C, this means he must prefer A to C also. For example, I say I like apples more than oranges. Okay, and oranges more than, let us say, bananas, then means he must prefer A to C, he must prefer oranges more to bananas. So that is called as transitivity of choices. If I said I like A more than B and I like B more than C, automatically you will like A more than C. That is called as transitivity of choices. Then very important assumption again is of consistency of choices. That is, a consumer will remain consistent in his choices. His choices will not change. Okay. So if a consumer is saying, I prefer A to B, I prefer A more than B in one particular period, then in no other period he will prefer B over A or B equal to A. For example, I say I like tea more than coffee. Then In this time period, if I'm saying I like tea more than coffee, the assumption is that at no point of time later on, he will say I like coffee more than tea now, or tea and coffee are same for me. So that is called as consistency of choices. My choices will remain consistent. They will not change. Once I have said that I have ordered that A is more than B, then always I will have to say that A is more than B. At no point A will become equal to B or A will become less than B. That is what you mean by consistency of choice. Then a very unique assumption is of diminishing marginal utility. Diminishing marginal rate of substitution. Sorry, it is not utility. It is diminishing marginal rate of substitution. What is this diminishing marginal rate of substitution? We have already understood what do we mean by the term substitution. Substitution means taking one instead of another. So let us understand what do we mean by diminishing rate of marginal rate of substitution. But before that, let us understand this term marginal rate of substitution. What we are assuming is that this marginal rate of substitution is diminishing. It is declining. But what is the definition of this marginal rate of substitution? Let us see. We say it is the maximum rate at which the consumer would be willing to substitute a little more of good X for a little more of good Y in order to leave the consumer just indifferent between consuming the old basket or new basket. Let us see this definition again by breaking it into small parts. What is MRS or marginal rate of substitution? It is the maximum rate at which the consumer, that is the rate at which the consumer is willing to substitute little more of good X for a little less of good Y. That is, if a consumer is saying, I want more of X. Let us say we have already said he is consuming two goods X and Y. Or let us say apples and oranges or any good you can assume. So if I am saying I am consuming X and Y, I want little more of X. Give me some more of X. Now if I want some more of X, I say okay, because you are giving some more of X, take some Y from me. So you are taking more of X, you are utilizing, you are buying more of X. But for taking more of X, you are reducing or you are giving up of some amount of Y. So the rate at which you are taking more of X by giving away some of Y, that ratio is called as your marginal rate of substitution. Why are we asking him to give more of some of Y in order to more of X? What can be the reason? Because we have to keep the consumer consuming the old basket so that he is just indifferent. Because if I say give me more of X, also I will not reduce my Y. This means you are consuming more of one good by keeping the amount of the other good the same as previous. This would mean that your level of satisfaction will be higher now. So you will move to another indifference curve. But in order to remain on the same level of satisfaction, if you are moving from one combination of good to another combination of good, in order to take more of one, you have to give up some of the other, and the rate at which you are making this exchange is called as marginal rate of substitution. Also, we have to remember that this MRS or marginal rate of substitution is also called as the slope of the indifference curve, and it is represented like this: MRS of XY, if there are two goods, is equal to dy by dx, that is change in Y because of change in X. So what is marginal rate of substitution? It is the rate at which the consumer is taking little more of one good and giving some of the other good, so that his choices or his utility or remains the same, or he remains indifferent between these two combinations of x and y. Now we have said in indifference curve that this marginal rate of substitution or MRS is diminishing. It is declining. What do we mean by this? This curve, this particular IC is your indifference curve, which is downward sloping. Right now, let us say you are at this point A where you are consuming some amount of X and some amount of Y. So if I am moving from, or as a consumer, if you move from point A to point B, which is lying on the same indifference curve, do you see some change in amount of X and Y? What has happened when you move from A to B? The amount of X has increased, whereas at B, the amount of Y has also changed, it has declined. At A, you were consuming less of X and more of Y, whereas at point B, you are consuming more of X and less of Y. Means in order to take more of X, you have reduced your Y. The rate at which of this particular substitution of X for taking more of X, the amount which of Y you have sacrificed is MRS. What we say is the rate at which you are taking more of X in order by giving up Y, that rate will keep on declining, or it will it will diminish. It will diminish. So our indifference curve exhibits a diminishing MRS, which means the more as you have more of good X, your willingness to give up Y will keep on declining. Let us say you have pencils and you have rubbers. These are the two combination erasers you have, and you have pencils. These are the two goods which you have. Okay, initially you have got one pencil and 10 erasers with you. That is one combination available to you. Then another combination available to you is 2 pencils and 8 rubbers. You say, okay, I am indifferent between these two combinations. Let me take, no, I want more of pencil. I just have one pencil. So let me have more of pencil. Because I want more of pencils, I will have to reduce the number of erasers which I can have. So initially you had less pencils, so pencils were dearer to you, and erasers you had substantial. So that was, you thought that it's enough, more than enough with me. So once I say, okay, now I want more pencil. So for one extra pencil, when you move from one pencil to the second pencil, you will be willing to give up more of erasers. Then from 2 pencils, now you go to 3 pencil. That is another combination available to you. So as you move from 2 to 3, your erasers have started declining. The number of erasers or the unit of erasers have started declining, whereas the units of pencils have started increasing. So with every extra increase in number of pencils, your willingness to give away the erasers will keep on declining. That is, initially maybe from 1 to 2, you were willing to give away 5 erasers. So you said, okay, give me one more pencil. I am willing to reduce my erasers from 10 to 5. So you are giving 5 erasers for one pencil. Now your new combination is 2 pencils and 5 erasers. Then say, okay, another combination available to you is 3 pencils and some amount of erasers. So what will happen? Now you may not like to give away 5 erasers for that one extra pencils. You may say, okay, the third combination, which is 3 pencils, I will have for 3 pencils, 3 erasers. That is, you are now willing to give up 2 erasers instead of 5 erasers for one extra pencil. So the more of pencils you have, your willingness to give away the other good, that is the eraser, keeps on diminishing or keeps on declining. Okay, because now erasers have become more dearer to you than the pencils. So therefore, your rate of substitution is declining. That is, more of one for extra of one good. Your willingness to give away the other good is diminishing. So that is what we are saying, that indifference curve exhibits a marginal rate of substitution which is diminishing, showing the more of good X you have, the more you are willing to give up to give a little of good Y. Okay, therefore indifference curves are flatter as we move towards horizontal axis and they become steeper as we move towards the vertical axis. Now let us understand the various properties of indifference curves. First, indifference curve have a negative slope, that is, it slopes downwards. You must have seen the curve was downward sloping. What do you mean by why downward sloping it is? It shows that in order to take more of one, you have to give up some amount of other. You cannot have more of both. So if your x is increasing, your y has to decline. Then we say indifference curves are always convex to the origin or they are bent towards the origin. They are bent towards the origin. This happens because of your diminishing marginal rate of substitution. Then we say indifference curve never intersect or they do not become tangent to each other. Never intersects means that if two indifference curves are intersecting means they have a common point, common combination of two goods which are lying on both the indifference curve. This is not possible because every indifference curve depicts a different level of satisfaction. The same bundle cannot give you same level of different level of satisfaction. Then a higher indifference curve represents a higher level of satisfaction as we have seen in the indifference map. A higher as you move outside or you move rightward on the indifference curve, a higher indifference curve shows you a higher level of satisfaction. Now let us understand these properties in details. One, we have said that the indifference curve has a negative slope. What does it mean? That again I am repeating, this property implies that when quantity of one good increases, the amount of the other good is reduced. That is, if you have more of pencils, you are moving from point to point B. In order to have more of pencils, you have to reduce the number of erasers with you. Why? Because if you have to maintain your same level of satisfaction, in order, if you want more of one, you have to reduce other. Okay. Second, a higher indifference curve represents a higher level of satisfaction because a higher indifference curve shows that you contain more of either both the goods in the combination or more of at least one good in the combination. Therefore, see, if you see the first property, when you compare it with the second property, they are related to each other. We have said that indifference curve are negatively sloping means in order to have more of one good, let us say x, you have to reduce the other good y if you have to maintain the same level of satisfaction. If you say no, give me more of x but don't reduce my y, means you are moving to a higher level of satisfaction because you are having more of at least one good x keeping the amount of y constant. So you move to a higher level of satisfaction. So if we have to remain on the same level of satisfaction, that is on the same indifference curve, in order to have more of one, we have to reduce other. Therefore, the curve will be negatively sloping. Higher indifference curve, high level of satisfaction. Why? Because if if you have a combination which is having more of both the goods or more of at least one good, this would mean your satisfaction is going to rise. Then indifference curve, as I told you, are convex to the origin. This happens because your marginal rate of substitution keeps on diminishing. Okay, because as and as you have more of one, your willingness to give away the other reduces. From, as I gave you the example of your your pencils and erasers. So as and as you had more of pencils, your willingness to reduce the units of erasers kept on declining. Because of this, your indifference curves are convex or they are bent towards the origin. However, there are two special cases or two extreme conditions when your indifference curves are not convex to the origin. One, when the goods are perfect substitutes, that is, they are complete substitutes to each other, then your indifference curve will become a straight line. If two goods are exactly similar and they are perfect substitutes, this means that your marginal rate of substitution will not decline. Diminishing marginal utility will not be there. Your marginal rate of substitution will remain constant because both the goods are giving you similar satisfaction, exactly the same. Therefore, in that case, the indifference curves are a straight line but a downward sloping line. The other example is when the two goods are perfect complements, your indifference curve is L-shaped. It is L-shaped. L-shaped meaning to say that there is only one and one combination of these two goods which are available. What are complements? When two goods are used perfectly together. For example, you're saying one keyboard and one monitor. Okay, one keyboard and one computer monitor. You can use only one keyboard with computer monitor. That is the only one combination which you have. If you say I want one more monitor, you may require another keyboard with it. So two monitors, two keyboards. Therefore, your perfect complements, in case of perfect complements, the indifference curves are L-shaped. Otherwise, your indifference curves are always convex to the origin. Then we have said that two indifference curves do not intersect with each other. That is because it would mean that two different levels of satisfaction, two different good combinations are giving you a similar level of satisfaction, which will violate the rule of transitivity. Let us see this graph to understand. Let us say IC1, there are 2 points A and B. IC2 has A as well as C. IC1 will give us one level of satisfaction. IC2 will give you another level of satisfaction. But A is lying on both of them. Is it possible that you get one combination giving you two different level of satisfaction? No. Because we have said that if A is more than B and B is more than C, then A has to be more than C. But A is lying on both the indifference curves, IC1 and IC2, which is not possible. Therefore, indifference curve will not intersect each other. So, let us do a small quiz for you for whatever we have done till now. The first question I am posing to you is, what is indifference curve analysis based on? Ordinal utility, cardinal utility, marginal utility, or none of these? On what approach is indifference curve analysis based on? Ordinal, cardinal, marginal, or none of the above? What will be the answer? The answer is ordinal. Another question, a higher indifference curve shows what? A higher level of satisfaction, higher level of production, higher level of income, or none of the above? The answer is, of course, A, a higher level of satisfaction. Another question, what does the slope of indifference curve indicate? Indifference curve slope indicates price ratio between two commodities, marginal rate of substitution, factor of substitution, or none of the above. The answer is marginal rate of substitution. What is MRS or marginal rate of substitution? The rate at which the consumer is willing to take more of X or one good by reducing the amount of another good. So you are so that your satisfaction remains the same. So you are moving from one point to another point on the indifference curve. That movement is called as the slope of the indifference curve or MRS. Now, why are these indifference curve convex to the origin? Is it due to rising MRS, declining MRS, or constant MRS, or none of the above? MRS is what? Marginal rate of substitution. Why is it convex? We have just understood. It is because of your diminishing or declining marginal rate of substitution. So, let us summarize what all we have done in this lecture. We have said that indifference curve is an ordinal approach for explaining consumer behavior. Indifference curve is defined as the locus of various combination of two goods which give equal level of satisfaction to the consumer. Various properties of indifference curve we understood, that they are negatively sloping. Higher indifference curve shows higher level of satisfaction. They are convex to the origin. Of course, there are two extreme points we have understood, and they do not intersect each other. So this is the indifference curve. In the next lecture, we will be understanding how do we get the consumer equilibrium using your indifference curve analysis. So I hope you must have enjoyed this lecture, my dear learners. Happy learning.